most accidents occur 2 minutes from home. Hold on. Well, actually, most accidents occur not only 2 minutes from home when I looked at it, it actually said 2 miles. That's the kind of overall thing that we've heard of, and maybe you've heard of it as well. But the official stat, I looked it up, is most accidents occur 10 miles from home. And it listed a few reasons, which is very interesting. And here are the reasons that they listed: underage driving, speeding, driving while impaired, more parked vehicles, more traffic, driving while tired, overconfidence. And I was thinking, like, what is the thing that has most in common? And one word came to my mind: comfort. Comfort. We feel more comfortable when we're there. And we have to look at, one of the things we have to always remember is not the action that's you're doing, it's like, what does that lead to? Like, if you're that way, what then happens? You know, if you're 40 pounds overweight, what now happens that doesn't necessarily happen if you're 20 pounds lighter than you are right now? We're gonna dive into that later. But this is what I thought of, and I thought of comfort. Like literally last night, or this morning, excuse me, I looked up that stat because I was just thinking, like, what happens? You know, what happens within that 2 mile, 10 mile radius of our home? And it was like everything's familiar. Everything's familiar. And then all of a sudden, if things are familiar, we feel comfortable. And then when we're comfortable, what we end up doing is we put our guard down. We don't do things that we do when we're not comfortable. You know, and I thought of it last night because I was maybe about 30 seconds away from my house, and I was bringing back food, and I got my food from the place I usually go, and I was coming back, and there was a bump that I didn't realize. And I was just like, whoa, that caught me off guard on my motorcycle. And then I thought to myself, like, what did that happen for? And I was like, because I got comfortable. I got comfortable. And it's like, this is where I am. This is how it is. And when we get comfortable, we do things that we don't do when we're not comfortable. I'm going to give you a perfect example. So some of you have never been here to Mexico. So you're not really sure what the life is like here in Mexico. You'd probably be, if you've never been here, if you've been here, then maybe it's a little different. But if you've never been here, you'd probably be more cautious. You'd probably be more aware. You'd be more alert. You would be more careful with what it is that you ate and what you drank. You'd be more careful. But see, if you were familiar with it and you're comfortable, you would do things a lot different. Because all that made me think of, like, what is the reason why when we feel comfortable that the people that I know, why would someone stay in a situation, or what is the reason someone stays in a situation that they don't like, they can't stand, but yet they stay in it? You know, what is that? And I realize it's because they're comfortable. And then another way of feeling comfortable is familiar. And I'm like, if for example, if you're not used to having money and you don't get it and everything's fine, you're okay with it. You've been through that through so many times, you're comfortable with it. And you just decide to just settle in that. Or whatever it is, you've been hurt, or you never met people, or you never hang out, or you got used to it and got familiar. And that familiar, something about people's brains, I've realized, is when anything's familiar, they automatically relate it as safer. Have you ever thought about that? They see it as safer because it's more familiar. And a perfect example of that was in the year 2020. As you guys know, if you've been following me, in the year 2020, I was living in Bali. I had just got to Asia, my first time ever in Asia. And the world started to shut down. The airports closed. In Bali, the airports closed for I think almost a month. Couldn't get into any other countries. And the one story that I kept hearing was that everyone should go back home. Every country said go home, because home is where it was going to be safe. And my brain put together, like, well, my one friend, she's going to Ukraine, my other friend's going to Russia, my other friend's going to Slovakia, my other friend's going back to Europe, my other friend's going to Paris, my other friend is going back to the States, other friend's going back to Canada. I was like, so all those places technically are safe. But then I realized, like, is it safe or is it just familiar? Go back to where you're familiar. Not that that's any safer. You know, it's so interesting because living abroad, I do a lot of calls. And if you guys don't know, Fridays we have our master class. But you can book calls before then if you have questions on traveling. And one of the things that people always say is, like, you know, especially when Americans call me, people from North America, United States of America, they always write me, it's like, hey, how safe is this? How safe is it in Mexico? How safe is it in Colombia? How safe is it in Bali? This is like one of the number one questions that I hear. And I'm like, well, where are you from? And I've talked to a lot of people in LA, a lot of people from New York, where else? So many different places around the States. And I'm always like, it's safer than where you are. And they're always shocked. And I love saying that to people that I speak to from the United States, because it's so true. Because like if you're from the United States, if you look at the capital, there's a stat you can look up. I don't want to say it on here, but you can look up stats to see how safe it is by people who are leaving the world every weekend or whatever it is. You look at that stat and you see the stats of other countries is way more safer. Like I have a few friends in Chicago, and they were asking me, "Is it safe?" Or they're not friends; they're just people that I had done one call with, or one call and done, or conversations I met in face to face. And I'm like, "Do you know the crime rate where you live? And have you seen the crime rate here?" And they're like, "Yeah, I never thought about that." I was like, "Yeah, like you should think about that, because if you look at it, it's way safer in just about every other country than the one that you're in." But the reason why we don't relate safety, or the reason why we don't realize the definition of safety, is because we often replace safety with familiarity. And for me, that's where we get stuck in this like feeling of like it's safer to be here and it's familiar, so I'm gonna stay here and deal with it, even though I know this isn't for me, even though I know this life isn't for me, even though I know this country that I live in is not for me, this job isn't for me, but I'm familiar, and because it's familiar, I feel safer. And some of you guys need to get unfamiliar. If I get some of us, me, myself, we need to get unfamiliar. I've recently cleaned out a lot of areas and cleaned my room and all this stuff, and it's very unfamiliar. I'm used to being very messy and having my stuff everywhere, and since I've cleaned my room and organized it in a way that I can spend more time there working, now I realize like it's very unfamiliar. And I realized it was just familiar to have stuff everywhere. But that doesn't mean that it's better. And even though better, I don't think is even a term that can be defined really well. There's other words you can use. It didn't mean that it served me well. It didn't mean that I could get more done. And if there's something I could leave with you today, it would be that if you're not liking where you are, you're not liking what you're doing, and yet you've stayed in it for a certain amount of time, maybe you should look at what you've become familiar with and understand how you correlate familiar with safety. And make sure I have to go in a minute. And just play around with that idea. As my friend Natty says, just try it on for size. Play around with that idea and see where that leads you. See where that takes you. Because maybe the reason you've stayed in the place that you're in for so long, even though you don't like it, is because it's just familiar. And you consider that as safe. And I just want to make you maybe look at it from a different perspective. And with that being said, I actually have to run, but I care about you. I want the best for you. Join us on Fridays where we can just dive a little bit deeper, rearrange the furniture in your mind. And with that being said, any questions you have, let me know. Leave it in the description below, or leave it in the comments below, and I'll get back to you. And have a beautiful day. And remember to work smart, be brave, and don't forget to smile. Ciao.